He lied about worthless stocks, generated millions in illegal profits, and served only 22 short months in a comfortable jail cell. Then Hollywood transformed his staggering catalogue of financial crimes into a global blockbuster celebrated by adoring audiences everywhere. This is the unbelievable true story of Jordan Belfort, the man who scammed America and somehow got rich again doing it. Perhaps the wildest part of this entire saga is that everyday people still cheer for him despite what he stole. It began in Bayside, Queens, back in 1962, a working-class Jewish neighborhood where dreams were modest and ambition had a very low ceiling. But one kid in that neighborhood, young Jordan Belfort, had absolutely no interest in ceilings or living a modest life. While other children played stickball, Jordan was already calculating margins, selling lemon Italian ices on the scorching summer streets. He would offer 2 ices for the price of 1, but only if the customer promised to tell 3 friends about his stand. By the end of that single summer, the 16-year-old hustler had made 20 grand, a small fortune for a teenager in those days. Most teens would have blown that cash on a flashy Camaro, but Jordan invested in a future he thought meant guaranteed wealth: dental school. On the very first day, the dean stood up and announced, "If you are here solely to get rich, you are in the wrong profession." Jordan stood up immediately, nodded politely, and walked straight out the door because cleaning teeth was clearly not the fastest path to millions. His next stop on the road to riches was the unglamorous world of door-to-door meat and seafood delivery. He pitched flash-frozen, hormone-free USDA prime steaks as being cheaper and better than the local neighborhood butcher's cuts. It was a messy, scrappy business, with Jordan hustling constantly, grinding gears, and sometimes melting steaks in the backseat of his car on hot days. Surprisingly, he managed to generate $100,000 a month in sales with no trucks, no storage, and absolutely no clue what he was doing. But the chaos of late deliveries, spoiled meat, and mountains of unpaid invoices piled up faster than the cash came in. Within months, the entire meat venture collapsed, bankrupted by its own disorganized weight, leaving Jordan back at square one. Yet, in the wreckage of that failure, Jordan discovered something that turned out to be his true superpower. He realized the product didn't matter at all, whether it was steaks, surfboards, or stocks. He could sell absolutely anything to anyone. Jordan didn't need a better product to sell. He simply needed a much bigger payout to satisfy his hunger. He entered the golden gates of Wall Street, landing an entry-level job at LF Rothschild, a prestigious firm. It was a legitimate company filled with expensive suits, high quotas, and questionable habits in the bathroom stalls. This was the 1980s, a time of absolute excess where he tasted real money, greed, and power. He learned exactly how markets moved and how brokers talked, but mostly, he mastered the art of the sale. Then came October 19th, 1987, the infamous day known to the financial world as Black Monday. The phones suddenly stopped ringing, and brokers stood frozen, staring in horror as the market tickers crashed. The economy collapsed completely, and just like that, Jordan was fired and found himself back on the street. While the rest of the financial world mourned, Jordan looked at the rubble and saw a golden opportunity. He discovered the obscure world of penny stocks, pink sheet garbage that no serious broker would ever touch. These stocks were unregulated and illiquid, but they possessed a magical secret that changed the game entirely. They offered massive 50% commissions, meaning the same sales pitch yielded 10 times the financial reward. No fancy degrees were required here, just a fast-working phone and an even faster-talking mouth. Jordan picked up the receiver and dialed a random stranger, a polite man named Mr. Michael in Nebraska. "Listen to me," Jordan said. "This company is sitting on technology that will disrupt home entertainment forever." He spun a tale about a ground floor opportunity completely flying under Wall Street's radar at that moment. He promised a 10 times return, claiming the big institutional investors hadn't even sniffed this one out yet. "In 6 months, you won't be calling to thank me. You'll be calling from your beach house in Maui." He pressed hard, asking if Mr. Michael wanted to be rich or just read about the success in Forbes. With that single adrenaline-fueled call, he closed a $4,000 deal and found his new kingdom. By 1989, Jordan Belfort was already pouring drinks for the next round of his life, and he was not alone. Enter Danny Porish, a fast-talking misfit from Long Island with the charm of a salesman and a hustler's instinct. Danny wasn't from Wall Street, and some days he didn't even seem to be from this planet, but he could close. Jordan saw raw hunger and loyalty in Danny, recognizing immediately that together they could be absolutely dangerous. Jordan provided the strategic vision while Danny brought the pure chaos, and from that volatile mix, an empire rose. They introduced the world to Stratton Oakmont, a name carefully chosen to sound like it had a 100-year legacy. It sounded like leather-bound books and old money, but in reality, it was a dumpy strip mall boiler room. The office had flickering lights, mismatched cheap desks, and exactly zero oversight from any regulatory body whatsoever. The early recruits weren't financial analysts. They were bartenders, college dropouts, and neighborhood hustlers looking for fast cash. Jordan didn't want experience because he didn't need thinkers. He desperately needed hungry, obedient closers who followed orders. Then came the training, where Jordan developed a ruthless method he called the straight line persuasion system. It was a psychological pressure cooker designed to turn stammering rookies into high-pressure selling machines in record time. He taught them to bulldoze through hesitation and drown out any doubt the client on the phone might have. The goal was to guide a prospect from hello to where do I send the check in one unbroken line. Soon, the office took on a frantic rhythm, becoming fast, loud, and completely addictive to everyone inside the room. The phones never stopped ringing, buy orders never stopped flowing, and the energy in the room was electric. Egos in the room were growing to massive proportions, and the money was stacking up just as fast as the pride. But Stratton's true brilliance wasn't just in how they sold, but specifically in who they targeted on those calls. They ignored the sharks and went after the forgotten investors, the working class retirees, and desperate parents seeking a break. Stratton sold them hope wrapped in false urgency, backed by made-up projections that would never actually come true. At first, they pushed obscure penny stocks, pink sheet garbage with nonsense ticker symbols like B, Z, ZT, or YU. These were companies that barely existed in the real world, often having no operations outside of their own optimistic press releases. But once the cash flow turned into a torrent, the schemes evolved from simple scams into complex financial maneuvers. It was no longer just about fake companies. They moved into real initial public offerings to capture massive capital. They secretly bought up massive blocks of cheap shares, hoarding them before the public even had a chance to buy. Then they turned the sales floor into a hype machine, generating a frenzy of artificial demand through aggressive cold calling. They flooded the market with manufactured excitement, spiking the stock price to astronomical levels based on absolutely nothing but noise. Once the price peaked, they dumped everything they owned, crashing the stock and leaving thousands of investors holding worthless paper. In the financial world, this illegal practice was known as a pump and dump, a classic form of market manipulation. But inside the walls of Stratton Oakmont, destroying the financial lives of strangers was just called another Tuesday. By the early 90s, the firm had exploded into a chaotic carnival where professionalism went to die a loud death. The office was a blur of screaming phones, blasting air horns, raging testosterone, and expensive $2,000 custom suits. There was also enough narcotics circulating through the room to tranquilize a rhinoceros, fueling the madness every single hour. Jordan built a ruthless system where fear and loyalty were the only currency that truly mattered to his employees. Top performers were treated like absolute royalty, receiving bonus checks, vacations, and gold watches tossed like candy. Underperformers were publicly humiliated, cut loose without hesitation, and replaced within hours by the next hungry recruit. Then came the legendary parties, with strippers in the conference room and expensive champagne overflowing into the fax machines. Lines of cocaine were snorted directly off company compliance manuals, a perfect metaphor for their regard for the law. Nothing was sacred in that office. Not the furniture, not the cars, and not even the emergency fire extinguishers. Jordan had officially transformed from a simple broker into a cult leader dressed in Armani, worshipped by his followers. He bought a helicopter, named his yacht after his wife, Naomi, and owned mansions, Lamborghinis, and Rolexes. Through it all, he preached the same sermon. Success is everything, and if you're not winning, you're nothing. On paper, Stratton Oakmont was thriving, bringing companies public and raising hundreds of millions of dollars. But under the surface, it was all smoke and mirrors. Because when you can't sell the truth, you sell the dream. Jordan Belfort had built an empire doing exactly that, but by 1994, the cracks were showing. Stratton Oakmont was on fire, taking companies public and moving millions, but the structure was starting to rot. The firm's IPO model was aggressive and familiar. but it was becoming increasingly reckless and dangerous to maintain. The playbook remained the same: overhype the stock, oversell the dream, and exit before reality finally catches up. But this time, they weren't invisible anymore. The SEC had flagged a growing list of suspicious filings. Complaints were piling up from investors who bought in at $7 and watched it crash down to 30 cents. Internally, some brokers were starting to ask questions about pushing stocks with no revenue and no products. Management's answer was simple and brutal: close the deal immediately or get out of the building forever. While the firm grew, so did the complexity of hiding the massive amounts of illegal money flowing in. Millions were funneled offshore through a tangled web of shell companies designed to confuse any investigators. Some accounts were hidden under Jordan's aunt's name in the UK to keep them off the books. Others were parked in Geneva, Switzerland, under corporate names that didn't actually exist in the real world. At one point, Jordan moved funds using human couriers, including a housekeeper smuggling cash in her clothing. She carried envelopes, stuffed with cash, sewn into the lining of her dress to bypass customs and get money to Switzerland. Jordan called this strategy asset protection, but the FBI had a much simpler name for it: money laundering. Inside the firm, the culture was changing. Drug use shifted from being a reward to a dark necessity. Quaaludes slowed their speech to a slur, while cocaine was immediately used to speed them back up again. The physical toll was immense. People passed out during calls, and one broker had a seizure on the floor. Violence erupted constantly over commissions, or women with employees escorted out by security after brutal outbursts. Jordan was unraveling faster than his company, with his marriage disintegrating amid pills found in couch cushions. He reached a new low when he crashed his Ferrari into a pillar while high on heavy sedatives. The most terrifying part was that his 3-year-old daughter was sitting unbuckled in the passenger seat beside him. Then came the infamous yacht incident in June 1996, a disaster born of pure arrogance. Against the captain's dire warnings, Jordan insisted they sail from Italy to Sardinia directly into a storm. Drunk, high, and feeling invincible, he believed that nothing, not even the ocean, could touch him. The yacht Naomi began taking on massive amounts of water in the middle of the Tyrrhenian Sea. On board were Jordan, his wife, their daughter, and over $2 million in jewelry and narcotics. The vessel was destroyed, and they had to be rescued in a dramatic operation by the Italian Navy. Jordan survived the shipwreck physically, but something inside his invincible persona had finally cracked open. Back in New York, the walls were closing in as journalists from major papers began poking around. Former employees started talking, but the most dangerous threat was FBI agent Gregory Coleman. Coleman wasn't just looking for red flags. He smelled blood and quietly pieced together the timeline. He pulled scripts, subpoenaed wire records, and tracked real estate purchases that didn't match reported incomes. He discovered Jordan was withdrawing cash in patterns, $50,000 at a time in cashier's checks. Coleman knew exactly what those withdrawals meant, and eventually, Jordan realized the game was ending. Line 120. One broker had been caught on a separate fraud charge, while another was bitter about an unpaid bonus. They wore hidden wires, recorded private calls, and turned over secret folders to the federal authorities. As the heat rose, more employees jumped ship, not out of morality, but purely for self-preservation. Then came October 1996, when federal agents raided Stratton Oakmont just after sunrise. Phones were ripped from desks, filing cabinets were emptied, and hard drives were copied by agents. Someone tried to flush documents, while another tried to walk out with shredded contracts in a briefcase. It didn't matter what they destroyed because the FBI already had everything they needed to prosecute. Yet, in early 1997, while under strict investigation, Jordan made one final fatal mistake. Explicitly told not to move funds, he wired $2 million to a secret account in Switzerland. The transaction was traced immediately, and the conversation about it had been recorded by authorities. That single illegal transfer became the loose thread that unraveled his entire criminal empire forever. By late 1998, Jordan Belfort was completely out of moves and facing 30 years in prison. The charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering were enough to bury him for life. So Jordan did what he always did when backed into a corner. He sold out everyone else. He flipped, agreed to cooperate with the government, and wore a wire to entrap his friends. One by one, the people who once worshipped him were handed over to the FBI like receipts. Over 30 employees were indicted, including brokers, partners, and friends who had trusted him completely. Some of them had joined Stratton right out of high school and learned everything from Jordan. They followed his playbook to get rich, and now they were paying the price for his crimes. While some served longer sentences, Jordan received only 22 months in a minimum security facility. It was a minimum security facility with no fences, no cells, and guards who didn't even carry guns on duty. He spent his mornings playing tennis and his afternoons lifting weights, treating incarceration more like a country club retreat. At night, he met Tommy Chong, the famous comedian, serving time for selling bongs, and they became unlikely friends. Jordan entertained Tommy with wild stories of drugs, the sunken yacht, and the millions he made and lost. Amused rather than outraged, Tommy gave him a piece of advice that changed everything. You should write this down. In 2007, Jordan published The Wolf of Wall Street, a memoir that read like a victory lap. There were no apologies and no remorse in the pages, just endless stories of yachts, orgies, and successful fraud. The public devoured the book, leading to a sequel and eventually selling the film rights to Hollywood heavyweights. In 2013, Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio turned his crimes into a global blockbuster, celebrated worldwide. Audiences laughed and cheered for the villain, while the man who lied to investors became a pop culture icon. But the victims he scammed didn't get movie deals or closure. They were left with absolutely nothing but debt. Teachers lost retirement funds, war veterans lost life savings, and families lost homes, all to fund Jordan's lifestyle. The court ordered Jordan to pay $110 million in restitution to the people he had defrauded. To this day, only a tiny fraction has been paid, while the rest vanished into legal loopholes and offshore accounts. Jordan is doing fine now, working as a high-paid motivational speaker, sales coach, and popular podcast host. He wears the name The Wolf like a badge of honor, rather than the mark of shame it should be. He didn't just escape true justice, he managed to sell his story and turn his fraud into lasting fame. He turned 22 months of comfortable jail time into a lucrative brand that people still pay to see today. He once said he was guilty of being greedy, but perhaps he got away with it because we are too. Line 160.